1600.
WWRL.
New York.
An Access One communications radio station.
Yetta Kurland's on the air. It's Yetta Kurland live. Yetta Kurland, listen in.
Good evening and welcome everyone to this week's edition of Yetta Kurland Live. I'm your host, Yetta Kurland. Tonight, we will be speaking with City Council members Melissa Mark-Viverito of Manhattan and the Bronx, as well as Brad Lander of Brooklyn about the new model of participatory budgeting in New York City. Then we'll talk to John Oppermann of Earth Day New York and Dr. Michael Oppenheimer of Princeton University about Earth Day in the New York area. Finally, we'll hear from Ambassador Michael Kenneth Moore of New Zealand about the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. I first want to thank our media partners, Go Magazine, Labor Press, the Soho Journal, Westview News, and the New Civil Rights Movement for helping make this show happen, as well as our community sponsors, The Ritz. You can pick up a copy of Westview News at 69 Charles Street. Check out Go Magazine at your local newsstand or at gomag.com. The Soho Journal at sohojournal.com. The New Civil Rights Movement is at the newcivilrightsmovement.com, and Labor Press is at laborpress.org. Also, you can listen to us live stream at WWRL1600.com, and please join us on Facebook at Yetta Kurland Live, on Twitter at Yetta Kurland, and check us out on the Huffington Post at huffingtonpost.com/Yetta. This week in the news, people around the world were shocked and horrified by the attacks at the Boston Marathon. That violent story is still unfolding. Meanwhile, today in Washington, the Senate failed to overcome a filibuster encouraged by the NRA to block even the simplest of gun control legislation, including background checks to ensure that assault weapons are not sold to violent felons. Seems like a no-brainer. In brighter news, New Zealand became the 13th country in the world, lucky 13, and the first in the Asia-Pacific region to legalize full marriage equality today, just as efforts are underway at the United Nations to strengthen ties between the U.S. and the region. Members of the Parliament and advocates spontaneously broke out into a popular Maori love song when the results of the vote were announced, and the comic book world got in on the action as well, as the first major comic book publisher introduced a transgender character, Batgirl's roommate, Alicia Yeoh. Batgirl's mentor, Batwoman, has been out as a lesbian for years and proposed to her comic book girlfriend a few months ago. We'll be talking about love, money, politics, trade, the environment, and more with Melissa Mark-Viverito, Brad Lander, John Oppermann, Michael Oppenheimer, Ambassador Michael Kenneth Moore, and you, the listeners, right here on Yetta Kurland Live. We also have in studio this evening our producer, Paul Newell, district leader, politician extraordinaire, producer here on WWRL. So call in with questions or comments. 212-868-0975 is the number to do so. 212-868-0975. It's an important time to be talking about participatory budgeting. There is a backdrop of a lot going on in terms of money and the influence of money in politics. So we are absolutely delighted to have Melissa Mark-Viverito and Brad Lander with us here in studio. First, Melissa Mark-Viverito is in her second term representing East Harlem, Manhattan Valley, and Mott Haven in the New York City Council. Brad Lander is in his first term representing so-called Brownstone, Brooklyn, and surrounding areas in the City Council. Lander and Mark-Viverito are co-chairs of the Council's Progressive Caucus and have pioneered a new process called participatory budgeting. I'm glad it brings them both to Yetta Kurland Live tonight. If you've got questions for Melissa Mark-Viverito or Brad Lander about participatory budgeting, the Progressive Caucus, or anything else, please call in now, 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. Melissa, Brad, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live.
Thank you.
Great to be here, Yetta. Wonderful to be on your show.
Thank you so much. I know Melissa's been on before. This might be your first time, Brad.
My first time, yeah.
All right. Well, you're going to do great.
That lead-in with between New Zealand and the comics,
You good?
Sounds good.
What's funny is that we pre-recorded this episode about New Zealand Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreements. Like earlier in the week, we had no idea that it would be on the exact day that they passed their marriage equality laws. So
Gives Trans-Pacific a whole new meaning.
I'm sure that they coordinated that with our show, don't you think, Paul?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that was the marketing.
That's probably what happened. So listen, like I said, the work that you guys are doing is incredible. I think participatory budgeting is just a great idea anyway, but it's especially important. I think it's an affirmative response, a positive response to some of the stuff we've been hearing about the corruption, the problems, more on a state level, but this kind of stuff can happen anywhere. But for our listeners, to begin with, who may not be as deeply tied to the going-ons in City Council, what is participatory budgeting? Brad, you want to take that?
You want to take that, Brad?
Sure. It's interesting. It's a new thing to New York, but it's not new in the world. It's been around for about 20 years. It was founded in Porto Alegre in Brazil, and now has been done in more than 1,500 cities all around the world, but mostly Latin America, Europe, and some in Asia. Very recent to North America. This was the second year we've done it in New York City, and it was done for the first time in the United States just 2 years earlier in one ward in Chicago. The idea is very simple. I mean, look, we're at a time when we really need government to be a place where people can come together to solve problems, and whether that's confronting, what we saw in the hurricane and our need to make sure we've got a more resilient city, to confront climate change, to confront gun violence. We need our government to be strong. Unfortunately, at exactly this time, there's a real crisis of confidence. Trust in government is low and gets lower when people see corruption, scandals, politicians stealing, taking bribes at, city and state levels. The idea here is simple. You take some piece of the public budget, that's, the people's money, and you let people decide what to do with it. First, to come up with brainstorm research projects that they believe solve problems in their neighborhood or create something new. So from some horrific school bathrooms that the one in my district to a solar-powered greenhouse on a public housing campus in Melissa's, whether real practical or real imaginative, brainstorm the projects, come up with the solutions, make sure they're feasible, work with city agencies, put a bunch of those projects on a ballot, and put it to a vote. And last week in New York City, well over 10,000 people across 8 districts came out to have their say and selected a great bunch of projects that they believe are what's most needed in their community.
It's amazing. And Melissa, it's $1 million, I think, that we're talking about here. Is that right? Is that per district or is that citywide?
Well, it's per district, and that's the minimum amount that every council member is going to allocate. Last year, I put $1.5 million towards projects, and this year I put $1.9 million towards capital projects that were selected by the community. So, it's really, as Brad just laid out, extremely empowering, and it really engages people to be true partners with us as representatives in governing and in making decisions. And I think that this is an example that we can also take beyond just the budgeting process. Obviously, we want to see it expand, but I think this is just about participatory democracy in general and building a true partnership with those that we represent so that we are accountable and transparent, and that basically the decisions we're making are really reflective of the priorities that are laid out by those that we represent.
And it's really public interested. I mean, so obviously the things that you're talking about, I'm sure that there's some great stories, and I want to hear from you about specific experiences with your communities. But the other thing that it does is it reminds the elected officials that this is not their money, that this is something like Brad said, it's the people's money, and it really brings people into this process in a way that's quite remarkable. Paul, is participatory budgeting happening in your district?
It has not happened in Lower Manhattan yet, but there's been a lot of suggestions of it, and I think that a lot of folks really do want engagement in our community. That's one thing as an organizer.
Right.
Well, I mean, we have several council members in Queens. We have several council members in Brooklyn.
Great.
I'm the only one in Manhattan and the only one in the Bronx that is doing this. We're obviously looking to expand it further. and have it be something that, it multiplied from 4 members last year to 8 members this year.
Mm-hmm.
We obviously have a whole bunch of new council members that will be joining us in the next term, and the idea is to really expand it to those that are returning and those that will be new. We really want to see this take hold, and I think that what we're finding is the response is overwhelmingly positive. I have people that approach me all the time that I don't represent asking, how can I get this to my district? And I said, you have to advocate this with your council member, right? So this is really critical. And I think the other thing I would say, for communities that have historically been disenfranchised, when you talk about low-income communities, when you talk about communities of color that really have a deeper, I believe, level of cynicism of government,
right.
What we're finding through evaluation, at least with my district, is that those that participated in the vote, those that participated in the process, are people that have not historically been actively involved in electoral politics. So this really does mobilize and engage, and it really shows that when we genuinely build that partnership, when we entrust those that we represent with decision-making authority, people respond. That's what government needs to be about. That's what should be a lesson to all of us, and that we really should be reconfiguring the way that we approach our jobs.
We're talking about participatory budgeting here on Yetta Kurland Live with New York City Council members Melissa Mark-Viverito and Brad Lander, WWRL 1600. Call in with questions, 212-868-0975. This is, in fact, participatory radio, pretty much.
Indeed. Everyone can vote on their questions.
That's true. Vote with your questions.
You can vote by tweeting at Yetta Kurland.
That's right. And also, if you're shy to call in, just please tweet us a question. We'll check those as well and ask council members Melissa Mark-Viverito and Brad Lander those questions as well. Listen, Brad, let me ask you a question. So you've been seeing a lot of tremendous response in terms of the constituents. How have your colleagues, you mentioned, this is not a new concept, although it is new to New York City. How have your colleagues received these ideas, and what has their responses been?
Yeah, well, as Melissa mentioned, when we did it last year, there were just 4 of us. Melissa, myself, Jumaane Williams in Brooklyn, and Eric Ulrich in Queens. It's been bipartisan from the start. We pleased it was 3 members of the Progressive Caucus, but also 1 Republican, showing that the idea of engaged democracy is deeply American.
Right, bipartisan.
And, I have to say, when we started, so we met Joe Moore, the alderman in Chicago that had started doing it about 2 years earlier. He did a speaking tour in New York City. We met him. We thought it seemed like a good idea. We teamed up with 2 nonprofits, one called the Participatory Budgeting Project, a national nonprofit that helps this get going, and then a New York Community Voices Heard, whose offices are in Melissa's district in East Harlem, but who works citywide, and they had learned about it at one of the World Social Forums. And when we first started talking to our colleagues at the council, I have to say they looked at us like we were crazy, and there definitely was a lot of skepticism, and it is a big thing to kind of wrap your head around at first. At first it's like, well, I thought, people elected their city council members to represent them, and how could you have an election, and how could people really know what the projects are,
right.
And won't there be too much competition, and what about the community boards? A lot of good, hard questions, but I will say that the first year was so successful, and when you come to the meetings, whether it's one of the big neighborhood assemblies where people brainstorm or the small budget delegate meetings where volunteers are debating which projects are feasible and which to put on the ballot, or especially if you come to one of the poll sites where just hundreds of people come out, and I've been really pleased, as Melissa said, that it really isn't the usual suspects. You really, we've seen that more people of color, more women, more low-income people come out to vote than in typical regular elections. It's very inspiring, and that meant that 4 more members decided to do it, and we think it'll keep growing. I think when you get people to kind of come take a look, it really, I have to say, I think it's the best thing that I have been able to do in my time in office, and the number of people who come out and just feel not just empowered. I really think it's 2 different things. Partly people feel empowered, like they have a say, it's our money, we should make the decisions. But I think it also really taps into people's sense of being stewards together of our public realm. That New Yorkers love our parks, our schools, our libraries, our streets and sidewalks. We don't get that many opportunities to take care of them together, to kind of value the ways that they make our shared life possible, that they create opportunity, create community. So
in real practical ways. I mean, obviously. And it's just amazing. I would layer that with one other benefit, which is that oftentimes the community comes up with ideas that maybe even an incredibly forward-thinking body may not come up with. And you'd be surprised probably some of the proposals and some of the ideas that come out of this process, in fact.
You're not suggesting there's something elected officials haven't thought of, is there?
No, certainly not. Just that they may amplify the ideas. No, but seriously, you probably also, you're probably surprised and also pleased with some of the ideas that folks come up with from the community that maybe we hadn't, wouldn't have automatically thought of.
Right. I mean, this is what is really so wonderful about the process, is that it just is the brainstorming and the creative thinking, and yes, the thinking outside of the box. There are things, as good as representatives as Brad and I may think we are, there are things that, we're not all knowing. None of us are. And we may not know every single priority that people within our district feel is important. So there was a Daily News article today highlighting one of the Bronx projects that won in my district, and it was on the ballot last year. It did not win last year. Mm-hmm. It was brought up again this year, and that was the idea of creating a greenhouse on public housing land in one of our developments as a way of really teaching about green jobs, about the importance of solar power, about growing healthy food and nutrition. It's a lot of different elements, but that came from the community, from activists.
That's
those
awesome.
that are advocating for more open space.
That's awesome.
That are advocating for green lifestyles and better transportation alternatives. So it was really wonderful to see, and that project won this year, and how thrilled the community was, and those that especially were really advocating for this.
And did people campaign? I mean, do people, community groups, folks in that development, campaign for their preferred project, what have you?
There is a level of campaigning, right? Because you want to educate the community about the projects that are on the ballot. Now, this is a question we get asked all the time. It's like, well, are there certain parts of the community that will be able to organize better and therefore get their projects funded? The reality is that this all really creates its own set of checks and balances. And what the projects that have won the past 2 years in my district are primarily projects that are on public housing development land, whether it's getting security cameras, whether it's upgrading playgrounds, equipment for our public hospital that we have in the district. I mean, it really does meet and address the needs of the majority in the district and the real priorities. And people that come in with their own preconceived ideas, at the end of the day, might leave with a different set of alternatives and options and priorities, because in talking to their neighbors, they realize that what they had in mind maybe is not as important as what another neighbor or other part of the community within the district needs. And it's really been a really great process to see how that all plays out. I'm sure Brad has some great stories about that as well.
It's an incredible process. I mean, and it's in a budget of $64 billion or what, it's $1 million well spent. Separate aside from obviously the positive results of what happens with those $1 million, the buy-in in terms of the democratic process, that's tremendous. I mean, you don't often hear that in normal politics in New York City. Were you surprised by how successful this was? Did you guys get a little nervous when it was just the four of you trying something out that maybe, hadn't been done in this area, at least anyway?
I mean, I think we were optimistic for it. Of course, you have a lot of anxiety. It does take a lot of work, and it especially takes a lot of work if you want to make sure that communities that don't typically come out really do. My district is mostly Brownstone, Brooklyn, so mostly upper middle class, largely white communities. I represent about 15,000 Bangladeshi Muslims in Kensington, and we really wanted to make sure that they learned and were able to participate. And so that takes, just a lot of work and outreach. It does across all communities. But we really have seen it. And actually, half the projects this year are in Kensington because that community just turned out in big numbers for 2 public school projects at relatively low-income public schools and for a street safety project in Kensington as well. So and I think that does start to call attention to broader questions about the budget, broader questions about how we focus on neighborhoods, about where the resources go, about how those decisions get made, some of which can get answered in participatory budgeting, but many of which, we need people to kind of get more involved, see the big picture in the budget, demand more information. We're not going to make every decision like this.
Sure.
But I think, as Melissa said, there's a lot more we could do. I was actually just up in Somerville, Massachusetts, real near Boston, where our minds and hearts have been so much this week, last week, to talk about participatory budgeting. And the mayor there, he has a system sort of like, what's here for the police comp stat or the mayor's management report, lots of data. But he goes with the council members and takes that data out to communities and does regular town hall meetings and uses social media to create a dialogue with people in the communities about what the results show. He's one of the first people to do one of those happiness or well-being surveys to try to figure out how people are, what their well-being is like. And there are a lot of other ways we could build on this. Using real data, using metrics, paying attention to performance, paying attention to the budget, really measuring what matters to people, but in a way that gives people a lot more say, that brings people together to confront problems, that is serious about issues of equity, and organizes people in communities. And that's the project. Participatory budgeting is great by itself, but if it helps pull us to find more spaces to do that, I think it'll really be
sure. No, I definitely think it's the beginning. I'm going to try to squeeze in just one. We have several callers, for which I apologize. We're only going to get to one of them before we end this segment. I'm going to go to Daryl from Midtown. Daryl, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Hello, how are you tonight?
Good.
Hi, I hear the discussion, and I try to galvanize people in my neighborhood. I'm in the Hell's Kitchen area, and I try to get people to use their power.
Yep. I think we lost Daryl, but I think it's a good. We're glad that Daryl uses his energy to
especially for.
Oh, there you are.
Families with young children, I think it's very important that they get involved. As far as not having a hospital in Chelsea, where St. Vincent stood. In my neighborhood, they have a lot of these. Little emergency centers that they build now, not necessarily a hospital, but like a Band-Aid, and then send you on your way. And also for budget reasons, I guess I see the parks be upkept, and just normal quality of life.
So hospitals and parks would be something that you would choose for participatory budgeting. Do you have a question, or maybe Brad and Melissa, you want to comment? Have you seen folks focusing on parks or something? I mean, I guess a hospital is far well and above $1 million. Is that the kind of stuff that you guys have seen?
I mean, no. I mean, like I mentioned that before, in my case, I have a public hospital in my district, and one of the projects that won last year was an imaging machine for the public hospital. And so there are, and playgrounds comes up all the time. Playground improvements, those are expensive, but that's something else that has come up, particularly playgrounds within my public housing developments. And so, I mean, those are, every community is going to have a different set of priorities, and so that is what's great about this project. It pretty much tailors itself to what the particular needs are of every district, which are very unique. Yeah, well, fantastic. Thank you for the work that you are both doing, and we're really excited to watch this progress, and we'll circle back with you sometime down the road, but thanks for coming on the Yetta Kurland Live to talk about it tonight.
Delighted to have the chance.
Thank you. All right, we'll take a short break. We'll come back. Callers, you should hold tight, and we'll get you on the next segment here on Yetta Kurland Live. We'll be just taking a few short minutes at WWRL 1600 Equality Pride Radio.
WWRL, sharing and celebrating the LGBT community's ideas, energy, and accomplishments.
And that is what it means here in New York to treat people fairly in the eyes of the law.
Back here on Yetta Kurland Live, WWRL 1600 Equality Pride Radio. We're going to be talking this segment about Earth Day. Michael Oppenheimer is going to be working with a group of people for a panel that's happening on April 27th at 4 p.m. That's a Saturday, April 27th at the LGBT Community Center, which is on 13th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue in Manhattan. We'll be talking about Earth Day, Superstorm Sandy, and contemplating and celebrating Earth Day for the first anniversary after Superstorm Sandy here in New York City. Michael Oppenheimer is the Albert G. G. Milbank Professor of Geosciences and International Affairs in the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. Oppenheimer joined the Princeton faculty after more than 2 decades with the Environmental Defense Fund, that's EDF, where he served as chief scientist and manager of the Climate and Air Program. Michael is also a longtime participant in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the IPCC, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. Also joining us tonight is John Oppermann. John is the Deputy Director of Earth Day New York. He is leading the efforts to plan New York's Earth Day events this year and also oversees programs working with students and communities in New York throughout the year. This Saturday, they'll be celebrating Earth Day at Union Square. If you've got questions for Dr. Oppenheimer or John Oppermann about Earth Day or anything else, please call us now at 212-868-0975. Again, that number is 212-868-0975. Dr. Oppenheimer, John Oppermann, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live.
Glad to be here.
Now,
thanks so much.
You're welcome. We did not plan the coincidence of the similarities of your names when we did this segment, but that's pretty. So should I call you Dr. Oppenheimer or Professor?
Call me Michael.
Michael, tell us about this panel that we're organizing for next weekend. It's not this weekend, it's the following weekend. Superstorm Sandy, Earth Day. Why is it important for us as a city to talk about these things?
Well, looking back on the long stretch of things that have happened since the last Earth Day, there's been a lot of progress, but there's so much more to do. And just thinking about it, actually, I was participated in the first Earth Day. That kind of pegs it how old I am. And it was a glorious time, and people were very excited about the potential for progress, and a lot of progress was made. Regrettably, the challenges have gotten even bigger, particularly with the challenge of global warming. And Sandy revealed the vulnerability of New York City to the threat of global warming. The damage that was done was large and would have been large anyway, but it was even bigger than it would have been without global warming, because the sea level around here is already about a foot higher than it would have been otherwise. But the Earth has been warming, the ocean's been warming, the waters have been expanding, and that's a risk that's going to increase in the future. We have to get better at dealing with it.
It's well said, and showing the vulnerabilities of New York City. I think that's exactly right. John, what is Earth Day New York focusing on for this year in 2013?
Yeah, so the theme this year is actually focused on climate change and making the connection between global climate change and the local impacts of climate change. It's obviously something that's more salient this year than it has been previously for a lot of New Yorkers, especially people who maybe climate change wasn't so much on people's radar in the past, but recent events, extreme weather like the Superstorm Sandy, really brought it home to a lot of people. So people have been making those connections. And we've actually reached out to quite a few different groups dealing with recovery and rebuilding after Sandy, and they're really becoming advocates in a way that they weren't before, and tying issues of like long-term sustainability and climate change mitigation and adaptation into their plans. So we actually have a few different panels planned. We have events in Union Square and also Grand Central. We're working pretty closely with 350.org.
Great organization doing a lot of good work.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll have a presence at our events, and we're having a premiere of a new movie called Do the Math, documentary about Bill McKibben's recent campaign across the country talking about divestment and everything that he and his organization 350.org have been doing. And the panel immediately before that will focus on this connection between global climate change and the local impacts, and bring people in from different groups in the Rockaways, Staten Island, Solar One, which is an environmental organization in the city. They're going to really be able to moderate and make the connections between the global issue and the local impact, considering their headquarters on the East River. We actually host one of our events was pretty much decimated by Hurricane Sandy.
It's amazing, and it's great. Like you said, organizations like 350.org, they did a lot of stuff to bring the awareness down to Washington, D.C. to talk about this on a national level, obviously to work to get funding to deal with some of these problems. Obviously, one of the problems that we saw with Superstorm Sandy was obviously the problem, as Michael said, exposing the vulnerabilities and the resilience issue, but also the long-term problem. There are still people, many people, who have not recovered, even come close to recovering recovering from Superstorm Sandy. So it's good to hear that you guys are making the local connections and really talking about climate change. And, I want to ask you both. I had a group of students from the Midwest, albeit, but they were, young kids, 20, 21, 22, on the show a week or so ago, and I asked them if they, what they thought about climate change, because they had come here to New York and to the New Jersey area specifically to do recovery work on behalf of folks who had been through Superstorm Sandy. And I asked a room full of probably 20 kids if they believed climate change existed, and a good 25 to 30% of them did not raise their hand. Have we gotten better at accepting the premise that climate change exists? Because I almost feel like the obstacles dealing with climate change are immense enough, but we're also dealing with, having to educate people and, get them to accept that there even is a problem.
Well, you never get 100% on anything, and this is an abstract issue unless you've been victimized by one of the big impacts like those related to Superstorm Sandy. You don't really appreciate what it's going to be like in the future, and so it's understandable that particularly young students really don't grasp the picture. On the other hand, I teach college, and I can tell you that watching the generational change is what gives me hope, because if there's confusion, it's mostly among older people, frankly. I think that students, even if they don't get climate change per se, they understand that human beings have abused the planet or continuing to overuse resources like our atmosphere, and that eventually we have to bring things back into balance. So what we need to do is both, in this case, reduce the emissions that are causing the problem, primarily carbon dioxide from fossil fuel burning, and at the same time prepare ourselves, because there's going to be some climate change we're going to have to deal with no matter what.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question specific to New York, but again, I just want to let folks know on Saturday, April 27th, which is a week from the Earth Day celebrations, April 27th at 4 p.m. at the LGBT Community Center, Michael Oppenheimer and others will be talking about celebrating the one-year anniversary of Earth Day after Superstorm Sandy, post-Superstorm Sandy Earth Day celebration, and talking about what we need to do as a city to prepare for the future, because it's not if there will be another such storm, but it's when there will be another such storm. John, where can folks go? Because you guys have a lot going on. It's not just Union Square, but like you said, there's stuff happening at Grand Central. There's going to be a movie showing. Where can people go to get a full list of your itinerary and to get involved in the stuff that's happening around Earth Day?
Yeah, we do have a lot going on, April 20th, 21st, and 22nd, and you can go to earthday.ny.org to check out all of the events. The full detailed schedule is not yet up. We're sort of still putting that into effect, but the basics are all there, and probably sometime tomorrow we'll have the full details of, like, hour by hour what's happening inside Grand Central and also in Union Square.
Great. Let's go. We got a bunch of people calling, and let's see if we can squeeze some of them in before the end of the program. Let's go to Joey from Brooklyn. Joey, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Hey, thanks, Yetta, for having me on air. What do you guys think about projects such as the White Roof Project, and how do you scale those into kind of larger organizations that are really implemented city and statewide?
That's a great question. The White Roofs Project. Michael, what do you think about the White Roofs Project? Is it effective?
White roofs are a good idea. They keep the temperatures in your home cooler during the summer, reduce air conditioning costs. It doesn't have a global effect, so we can't. Even if we painted every roof in the world white, it wouldn't offset enough of the global warming. That's why we need to reduce emissions. But every action that we take to make either our own local environment better or contribute to the global environmental improvement is worth taking. I mean, change those light bulbs in your home into LEDs or compact fluorescents. If you buy a car, make it the one with the highest fuel economy in the size class you need. Get the appliances with the highest energy efficiency on the sticker, on the yellow sticker that EPA provides. So, some of these actions, they add up, and if everybody did them, we'd live in a better world.
Again, Michael Oppenheimer will be leading a panel discussion on April 27th at 4 p.m. at the LGBT Community Center. That's April 27th, a Saturday. That's on 13th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue. Come take part in it, learn more about this. Michael, if you could say on a citywide level, now we're not just talking about individual residents, but on a citywide level, if there's one thing that this city could do, because I know that climate change and environmental issues are immense and sometimes feel overwhelming. If there's one thing the city of New York could do to make a huge step forward, or the largest step forward, to help deal with this issue, what, in your opinion, would that be?
Retrofitting existing buildings to be much more energy efficient. We've got a good code for new construction, but the mayor, who's done a reasonable job on this issue, backed off because of political pressure when it came to the idea of having a building code to make existing buildings energy efficient. I think that's the number one step I'd like to see done.
It would be certainly very helpful. Let's try to squeeze in one last caller. I apologize to the folks we didn't get to this week. We will get to you next week if you call back in for us. We're going to go to Matt from Manhattan. Matt, welcome to Yetta Kurland Live. You're on the air.
Oh, hi. Yes, thanks for taking my call. My question is about recycling bins. Does the city have a plan in place to add more recycling bins? Because there's garbage cans pretty much everywhere, but you can walk miles without seeing a recycling bin, and want to see what the city is planning on doing about that.
It's a great comment, and before I have our experts answer it, I just want to amplify that by saying another problem is that in buildings that are supposedly recycling, oftentimes those of us good doers go to try to recycle and in fact can't because the building doesn't have the resources, or then even if they do have the bins, they don't actually ultimately recycle. Michael or John, is there anything we can do about that?
That one.
No? Well,
I actually don't know the answer to it. I don't know how pervasive the problem is. Surely those bins need to be more available than they are.
Sure. Again,
and I would agree. I think that a lot of people are actually confused and disappointed by that. We actually work pretty closely with the Department of Education in New York, and the biggest issue that we see even with teachers is frustration over wanting to recycle and not having the capacity to. We actually have seen some positive developments, though, from Ron Gonen, who is in the Department of Sanitation. We're actually giving him an award on Monday night.
That's great. Listen, John,
the awards.
Give us one more. We're out of time, so just give us one more time. What's the website to go to learn about all the events that you guys are organizing?
Yeah, it is earthday.ny.org.
Great. And again, Michael Oppenheimer on April 27th at 4 p.m. at the LGBT Community Center. That's Saturday, April 27th. Michael, John, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. Thanks for coming on to Yetta Kurland Live and giving us all an update.
Thanks for having us.
All right, great.
Thanks so much.
And finally, as I mentioned earlier on the show, today was a big day for the country of New Zealand, which became the first in Asia Pacific to legalize marriage equality in the region. They are also currently leading the charge at the United Nations to tighten trans-Pacific economic ties through a new trade deal. What an irony that I was able to speak to New Zealand's Ambassador Michael Kenneth Moore about that subject just this last week. Unfortunately, as this segment is pre-recorded, we won't be able to take your calls, but call back in next week. I promise we'll get to them. We'll be back next Wednesday at 10 p.m. right here on WWRL 1600 AM Equality Pride Radio with Yetta Kurland Live, and listen in to Michael Kenneth Moore, Zealand's ambassador. Ambassador Michael Kenneth Moore, thank you for taking a moment to speak to me here on Yetta Kurland Live, all the way from New Zealand. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing. Specifically, what is this Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement?
Oh, this is a major trade deal. This is Canada, US, Mexico, Peru, Chile, New Zealand, Australia, Brunei, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and talks are now underway with Japan. So this, if this works, this is sort of $78 billion worth of business for the United States. If you calculate every $1 billion gives you 5,000 jobs, you can see how profound this is for all of us. And we're being escorted around by UPS and GE, and I've been involved in trade 20, 30 years, but the whole trade patterns have changed, and this is what we're now learning. It's all about supply chains now. The trade figures aren't reliable. For example, I learned only yesterday, for every dollar Mexico exports to anywhere in the world, America gets 40 cents of that dollar because of the sophisticated supply chains we're getting. And companies like UPS's job is to join up those supply chains, right? And I know UPS has a very strong union labor force with it. Yeah, the Teamsters, right. How does this impact organized labor, and how does this impact fair wages for workers? Well, the truth is export jobs always employ more. get more higher income. But in the end, in the global economy, you can protect old jobs for a while, but that'll be at the cost of new jobs. And in the end, you'll have neither new or old jobs. So we've got to see what the global economy looks like. And for all that, I see all this negative stuff in the American media. I can hardly believe it. The US is the world's biggest exporter of agricultural products. You're the biggest manufacturers. You're the biggest service sector. And as we move into a more service sector economy in the post-industrial age, America will be a net winner of all this. And so what we're trying to do is a deal which will eliminate a whole lot of the back office stuff that costs businesses money, costs jobs, and creates inefficiencies. And a lot of these inefficiencies are environmentally costly. And, of course, so there it is. I mean, that's the history of the last 50 years.
Right.
I mean, people forget that the last 50, 60 years, we've created more wealth in the world than the rest of history put together.
So the idea is that this would have a positive impact also in terms of environmental issues that often go hand in hand.
Yes, we will have environmental chapters and some stuff on labour, and we're all working our way through on fishing subsidies, this sort of stuff. So, New Zealand is very enthusiastic about this. We've got to deal with China. We're Asia Pacific. Half the middle class in the world will be in Asia Pacific. And, of course, America's also talking about a US-EU deal as well. So the trade world's humming, and this is what we need as an economic stimulus to create more jobs at both ends. It's not a zero-sum game.
Sure, absolutely. And specifically as the rubber hits the road for our listeners and folks here in the United States, how does this impact U.S. workers? What's in it, if you will, for the U.S. economy and U.S. workers?
Well, more jobs is the key thing, isn't it? And if you can get more trade moving at better incomes, this is the history of the last 50 years, you'll do better. There would be one or two areas where you'll have to readjust. And I can think of, you are the greatest agricultural exporters in the world. Your soy is fantastic, all that sort of area. But in some areas like sugar, you may have to make some adjustments. And look at Vietnam. Here's 90 million people, young, hungry, wanting to join the global economy. The Vietnamese very much like Americans. So, but they'll need something in textiles as they open their markets up to insurance, to your service companies, and to your exports. And the consumer is the worker. And, I've never known what's so progressive about making shoes and T-shirts dearer for workers.
Well, and you mentioned the environmental protections. I wonder if you could speak specifically about some of those protections. And then I would ask, helping the environment and creating jobs, actually don't those two ideas go hand in hand, meaning pro-environmental measures actually can create additional jobs?
They can if they're done the right way, and that's for sovereign governments. Now, there's discussions now, and I'm not privy to the details on the environment, but our basic case is that subsidies are anti-environment. If you take fisheries, we can overfish the world by 270%, and that is because some big countries subsidise the energy that goes into those fishing vessels. Get rid of those subsidies, let the thing work, and workers in poor countries need jobs too, by the way. And the great moral challenge of our age is how to bring another billion people into the global economy as citizens, producers, and consumers. And the great story of what's happened in China with 400 million people now consuming, now producing. They're your customers. And here's another thing that's misunderstood in trade. These figures are roughly right. The famous iPad at $100, right, or so. So the iPad, it looks like it's $100 worth of business China gets that you don't get. No, it's not true. China gets a couple of dollars of that, but you'll get $20 to $40 of that in terms of your trademarks, your patents, your IP, and that's part of the whole supply chain now.
Sure.
There's more American parts in a Korean car than there is in a Chevy car.
So what I'm hearing you intimate, maybe, when you talk about agriculture being the highest exporter of agriculture, maybe we're overproducing on agriculture. Maybe the laborers who are creating the iPads aren't getting the fair share of what the profits would be. So is it
I think that's a basic misunderstanding of what's happening. If you take in 1900, 80% of all workers in America and in New Zealand would have been on the land. Now, be lucky if 5 or 7% of our workers are on the land in both countries. But we're producing more fibre, we're producing more food than ever before. And we're seeing in a post-industrial economy fewer and fewer workers involved in that work, and more technology. And so that is natural. And as we move to a service economy, both countries, and others lift their play, the thing moves ahead.
Ambassador, I was going to ask you what the impetus was behind this trade agreement, but what I'm hearing from you, is it right that, in essence, you're taking into consideration technology, moving into a service economy, and making sure that there's a balance for the way that wealth distribution happens globally? Is that kind of what the impetus is?
I would hope so. It's about creating more consumers to buy your products and mine. And it's about making sure people in our own countries get a better standard of living and not to the cost of the environment. I think we're smart enough to do that. The impetus is that the global economy has slowed. We need an economic stimulus based upon production and these sort of things, and the world trade talks are stalled. And so many of us are enthusiastic about doing this, but it has to be a 20th, first century thing as well. There are issues of intellectual property. There are complex issues of state-owned enterprises in some countries. But there are some old issues as well. Now, in agriculture, you are the superpower, but there are a couple of product areas where you're losing jobs from America to Canada and elsewhere because of sugar subsidies, not being able to source sugar into the supply chain from the Caribbean and Africa. And so many countries have those sort of anomalies. But overall, your agriculture is just stunning. You are the most successful in the world. But there are one or two pocket areas where imports aren't allowed in. And if that input of that sugar can't get to Mars, that means all the workers have to pay more for that product. What is good about that? That is bad. We, of course, have a dairy industry. We represent 1% of your consumption of dairy. If you can't get your cheap inputs to your dairy products and provide some competition. Now, competition, I'm a progressive. Competition is frequently seen as sort of anti-environment, anti-worker. Competition is about driving up better efficiencies, better use of your input costs, better use of resources, and a better use of resources is an environmental good.
No, I think
balance is all way. We're in the middle of the negotiation. The President, your team have said they want this thing done. They want tariff elimination. They want comprehensive, and they're instructing us to try and do it this year, and we'll do our best. Because your economy needs it, and so does mine.
Well, I hear you talking about kind of leveling the playing field, looking at this from a global perspective. It's interesting for us to think about that. Oftentimes, we're talking about what's happening in the U.S. economy, in the local, New York City metro area has 8 million people.
We all do this. It is natural. All politics is local. All of us read our local papers. Don't feel bad about that. But look at New York, for heaven's sake. It's financial capital of the world. Give me a break. You've got the most innovative, creative people in the world there. I'm sitting listening to your music all the time. And by the way, we make cinema in New Zealand. What do? We're using your expertise, English authors, your artists, ours. Everybody wins along with the supply chain. And we have a more, hopefully, peaceful planet.
Well, Ambassador, I have you on the exactly, and first of all, thank you for your compliments on the agricultural industry, and thank you for listening to our music. And while I have you here, I wonder if I could ask you. Obviously, the global economy is important; it touches all of us literally on a daily basis. The United States has moved a lot in that global landscape. Can you talk a little bit about how that's happened and how the U.S.
Just briefly, because I'm being threatened and waved at. I've got to do something else at this moment.
Sure.
But here's the thing: we're back. You'd be a mug not to back America. You have a look at what's happening in your energy prices. America's economy is moving. You compare it with how flat Japan is and how backward Europe is. This place is America's humming. You have political problems, not economic problems. If you have a look at your energy costs, they're collapsing. In any major economy, your energy cost per industrial unit output is just collapsing. So America is going to be very, very successful. I mean, you've got 27 of the top 30 universities. I don't know what's the matter with Americans. You guys are pumping. 27 of the top 30 universities. Look, over 2/3 of patents pending are from the United States.
Right.
You imagine a little country like mine, some of them are scared about America might beat us up, but we know we can do good in a couple of niches.
I have to return the compliments and thank you for the Flight of the Conchords and the Lord of the Rings. I mean,
no, good, eh?
Contribute to the
but they have to come to America to make it. Flight of the Conchords. I better go. I'm being threatened.
Where can our listeners go to learn more about this? Is there a website or something?
You get hold of, have a look at anythingnewzealand.com. You'll find it, I guess.
Well,
but see the see the Lord of the Rings and all that. But what a magnificent supply chain that is. It wouldn't have worked without American technology, and wouldn't have worked without our own creative stuff and a few English authors who are dead.
Thanks for taking time
okay,
with us,
mate.
and good luck to your work, and we'll look more into Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement.
Thanks a lot.
Yep, thanks for taking the time. Yep.
Love New York. Bye-bye.
Thanks for taking the time.
The preceding program was independently produced. The views and opinions expressed were those of the program host and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of WWRL, its staff, or management.